The Gaelic Athletic Association, or GAA, is the largest sporting organization in Ireland and one of the most prominent amateur sporting associations in the world. It includes over 2,200 clubs throughout Ireland's 32 counties and supports another 400 clubs globally. Millions of people throughout Ireland and all over the world participate as players and fans, and Croke Park, the headquarters for the organization, is one of the most spacious and modern stadiums in Europe. Athletes compete in Gaelic football, hurling, handball, and rounders with deft skill and athleticism, all for love of the game and pride in their country. The GAA further supports Irish language, music, and dance. On the surface, the association appears to have a straightforward niche as a social club, but the history and function of the GAA are much more complex and important. The GAA, while serving as a community organization and sports club, played an integral part in modern Irish history. Through the promotion of Gaelic games and culture and its early associations with Irish republicanism, the club served as an impetus for the Gaelic revival of the late 19th century and took a prominent and public stand against British cultural political imperialism during the Anglo-Irish War. The island of Ireland remained largely untouched for most of its early history, and as such it retained a distinctive Celtic culture which distinguished it from its Anglo-Saxon neighbors. Beginning in the 1160s, however, Ireland was invaded by the English, and throughout the following centuries, the British retained varying amounts of control over the island. During the Tudor reign, however, the English plantation system made the Irish tenants on their own land. This, combined with Anglican attempts to eradicate Catholicism, began an era of Gaelic Catholic oppression and British imperialism, culminating in the 1800s with the brutal penal laws which severely curtailed Catholic rights. The controversial potato famine of the 1840s, which was exacerbated by the British government's exportation of foodstuffs, further devastated the island and caused the population to fall by more than a fourth due to starvation and emigration. By the early 1900s, the Irish were ready for autonomy and eventually independence. To achieve this, however, they would have to defeat the world's strongest power. Although traditional Gaelic football and handball games had been played in Ireland for thousands of years before the English occupation, a widespread attempt to systematically eradicate distinctly Gaelic aspects of Irish culture on the part of the British, combined with the devastation of the potato famine, meant that these games were in decline by the late 19th century. In response, the Gaelic Athletic Association was founded in 1884 by a teacher and nationalist from County Clare, Michael Cusack, who was dismayed by the disappearance of traditional Irish games and sports and their replacement by English ones like cricket and rugby, which he saw as the chains of imperialism and oppression. Initially, his objectives were straightforward: further Irish sports and culture and create a single administrative body. As the fledgling organization grew and found patrons like Republican politician Charles Parnell and radical labor leader Michael Davitt, however, it quickly became associated with the rising Irish Republican movement, and the lines between sporting organization and political instrument blurred. One influential early patron was Dr. Thomas W. Croke, Archbishop of Cashel. He worked tirelessly to promote the new association, and this connection allowed the GAA to organize alongside and in conjunction with already existing parish and county structures. These early ties with the Catholic hierarchy in Ireland would remain an essential aspect of the GAA's growth and success. Many of the patrons had radical Republican ties, and some were even members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a militant nationalist group that supported independence. They wanted the GAA to play a more significant political role, and at the annual GAA convention in 1886, the IRB took control of the executive, a role that it would retain throughout the Irish War for Independence. Although the two organizations were never officially amalgamated, the ulterior motives and objectives of the IRB leadership caused the GAA to become extremely political, and there was extensive overlap between the groups' membership. This connection was quickly identified by the British police in Ireland, who wrote of the exposure of the GAA by the IRB. This classification with other revolutionary groups further radicalized the GAA. The formation of the GAA also furthered the Gaelic revival of the late 19th century. The British had promoted the idea that the Irish were inherently inferior, a sentiment that took root amongst the desolation of the potato famine. The Gaelic revival helped change this view. It promoted a pride in a shared Irish history and culture, and it reinvigorated Irish nationalism through the use of language, traditional myths and legends, music, and sports. This helped create a distinctly Hiberno culture, resulting in a fluid environment of Irish patriotism, as well as an emerging desire for independence. Through the GAA's role as a leader in the Irish Ireland movement, the organization stood up to centuries of British cultural imperialism and helped revive traditional Gaelic culture and identity. To further this aim, the GAA enacted the Ban, a set of definitively anti-English rules that forbid all members of the British Armed Forces from joining the GAA. By forming quasi-alliances with the Church, the Republican political movement, and the Gaelic social revival, the GAA was able to help unify almost every aspect of Irish culture in a pro-Gaelic and anti-British stance. This atmosphere created a social environment ripe for revolution. The GAA also began to make a more public and obvious stand against the British in Ireland. Its role as an athletic club meant that it provided the IRB with a perfect recruiting ground. Large numbers of GAA members fought with the rebels during the Easter Rising, and prominent GAA leaders even urged their members to join the Irish Volunteers. By the Anglo-Irish War's onset in 1918, the GAA had become an operative opponent of British rule in Ireland.
And from the very beginning, politics dominated the association, particularly extreme nationalist politics. The hurley became a metaphor for the gun, if you like. And of course, it was the GA players who supplied the rank and file really for the volunteers and freedom fighters, there's no doubt about that.
During the war, the GAA remained active, although it served in a largely supporting capacity. Many of the association's ranks fought against the British, and the GAA openly honored Irish deaths during the war by canceling or dedicating matches, and the club also helped raise funds for prisoners and internees. Notable Irish revolutionary leaders like Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera were personally involved with the organization, a strong statement as they were considered terrorists by the British government during this time. In addition, Irish prisoners and internees played Gaelic games extensively as a way of affirming their Irish identity, and this was viewed as a form of protest by the British. The GAA was no mere passive supporter of independence. Oftentimes, the nationalistic fervor of the association manifests itself in physical displays. Gaelic Sunday exemplifies the GAA's commitment to taking risks and standing up to British oppression. During the summer of 1918, the GAA decided to ignore British laws that banned matches without special permits. Over 1,500 matches took place around the country, all technically illegal. There was no police response, and this victory further secured the GAA's role as a national player in the Anglo-Irish War, and it demonstrated the active stance that the GAA took in opposition to the established government of the time. The most infamous example of the GAA's involvement in the war occurred on November 21, 1920, Bloody Sunday, when the British Army opened fire during a match, killing 14 and injuring more than 50. The UK justified the massacre by alleging that there were IRA gunmen present at the game, but all those killed were civilians, and many assert that it was a result of the GAA's broad association with the Republican Front. This horrible day of retribution emphasizes the sacrifices that the GAA made in its stand against social and political injustice. Existing police records further document the violent intent of those involved, as police were ordered to picket all exits and to try to shoot those who were fleeing. The Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 ended the war in Ireland, and it created the Irish Free State, bringing freedom and independence to a majority of the island. The Gaelic Athletic Association stood up to British imperialism by helping reshape an Irish identity and then aiding a revolution. The organization and its members took risks and sacrificed themselves to promote change, and they demonstrate how a group made up of dedicated and impassioned individuals working together can stand up to and help defeat a global power.